Chapter 1. Arrival. The words carved into the gatepost were the first I ever saw in Blackthorn. No soul leaves whole. They were jagged, etched deep into the rotting wood, as if clawed by something desperate. I was 13, or so I thought, when the truck rattled us into this nowhere town in Manitoba, Canada, in the summer of 1947. My name was Caleb Morse, or that's what the man driving the truck called me. He was a lean American with a face like cracked leather, named Hargrove, who said he was my uncle. I had no memory of anything before the truck, no family, no home, just the hum of the engine and the smell of diesel. The other kids in the back, 6 of us, looked as hollow as I felt, their eyes darting to the pines that choked the road. Blackthorn wasn't a town you found on maps. It was a smudge of clapboard shacks, a church with a caved-in steeple, and a sprawling estate called the Hollow, where Hargrove said we'd work. The estate loomed at the edge of town, its windows black as tar, surrounded by fields of wilted corn. Nobody spoke as we climbed out. The air was thick, like breathing molasses, and the cicadas screamed. Hargrove pointed to a barn behind the estate, its doors sagging like a drunk. "Sleep there," he said, and drove off, leaving us to the dust and the words on the gatepost. Chapter 2. The Hollow's rules. The barn smelled of mildew and fear. 50 cots lined the walls, some occupied by kids who didn't look up when we stumbled in. Their faces were gray, their hands knotted from work. A girl, maybe 15, with hair like straw, whispered her name was Ruth. She told us the rules. Work the fields from dawn to dusk, eat what's given, don't ask questions, don't run. The overseer sees everything, she said, glancing at the rafters. The overseer was Elias Crane, the man who ran the Hollow. Nobody knew if he owned it or just haunted it. He was tall, with eyes like oil slicks and a voice that scraped your bones. Every morning, he stood on the porch, holding a brass bell that rang sharp enough to make your teeth ache. The bell meant work. We hoed corn, pulled weeds, and hauled water until our hands bled. Meals came twice a day, served on tin plates slid through a slot in the kitchen door. The food was always cold: grits, turnips, sometimes a sliver of meat that tasted like ash. Before we ate, Crane would walk the line, dripping a clear liquid from a vial onto random plates. For strength, he'd say, but nobody believed it. We'd seen kids clutch their throats and collapse, eyes bulging, after a bite. I learned to trade my food with the rats that skittered in the barn. They didn't seem to mind the poison. Chapter 3. The night sounds. Nights were worse than days. The barn groaned under the weight of the dark, and the air grew heavy, like a hand pressing your chest. We'd lie on our cots, listening. Footsteps crunched outside, slow and deliberate, circling the barn. Sometimes they'd stop, and you'd hear breathing, wet, ragged, like a dog after a chase. Nobody dared look out the windows. Ruth said it was Crane, but I wasn't sure. Once, I saw his shadow on the wall, stretched and wrong, like it had too many arms. The kids who cried at night were the ones who vanished. You'd wake to an empty cot, their shoes still under it, laces neatly tied. Nobody spoke of the missing. We feared saying their names would call Crane's attention. I kept a pebble in my pocket, stolen from the field, and rolled it between my fingers to stay awake. Sleep felt like surrender. One night, a boy named Tommy, who'd arrived with me, sobbed too loud. The footsteps stopped outside his window. By morning, he was gone, but his cot had a new mark, a smear of red, like a thumbprint, burned into the wood. Chapter 4. The cornfield's secret. The cornfields stretched endless, their stalks brittle and sharp. We worked in pairs, hacking at weeds with dull hoes. My partner was a boy named Jonah, 16, with a scar across his cheek like a lightning bolt. He didn't talk much, but his eyes were always scanning, like he was waiting for something to break. One day, deep in the field, he pulled me behind a stalk and pointed to the ground. There was a trapdoor, half buried, its edges rusted. "Don't tell nobody," he whispered. We didn't open it. Crane was too close, his bell clanging. But Jonah said he'd seen a man climb out once, covered in dirt, muttering about the roots. That night, I dreamed of the trapdoor, of hands pushing up from below, their fingers black and twisted. I woke with a scream stuck in my throat. Jonah was staring at me from his cot, his finger to his lips. The footsteps were outside again, closer than ever. I clutched my pebble so hard it cut my palm. Chapter 5. The black car. A car came to the hollow once a month, a black Packard with windows like voids. It growled up the drive, its engine sounding like a storm trapped under the hood. Crane would meet it alone, standing by the estate's iron gate. The driver never got out, but I saw his silhouette once, broad shoulders, a hat tipped low. They'd talk in low voices, and Crane would hand over a crate, its contents hidden under burlap. The car would leave, and Crane would disappear into the estate for days. Ruth said the crates held what we grow, but the corn was rotting, and we never harvested enough to fill a bucket. Jonah thought it was something else, something under the fields. He started sneaking out at dusk, watching the trapdoor. I begged him to stop, but he said he'd rather die knowing than live blind. One evening, he didn't come back to the barn. I found his hoe the next day, stuck in the dirt by the trapdoor, its handle splintered. Chapter 6. The plan. I couldn't let Jonah's disappearance be another silence. I started watching Crane, memorizing his movements. He never slept, or if he did, it wasn't in the estate. I'd see him at midnight, pacing the porch, his bell glinting in the moonlight. I noticed something else. He always carried the vial of poison tucked in his vest pocket. If I could get it, maybe I could use it against him. Ruth caught me staring once and grabbed my arm. "Don't be stupid," she hissed. "He knows when you think too loud." But I was already planning. I'd seen a loose board in the estate's cellar when I hauled water. It led to a crawl space under the kitchen where the food was prepared. If I could slip in, I might find the vial, or something worse. I kept a stash of tools, a bent nail, a shard of glass, and a length of twine I'd unraveled from my cot. They felt like weapons, pitiful as they were. I told Ruth my plan, hoping she'd join me. She just shook her head and turned away. Chapter 7. The crawl space. The cellar smelled of earth and decay. I pried the board loose with my nail, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. The crawl space was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders. I slithered through, the dirt cold against my belly, my shard of glass clutched like a talisman. Above me, the kitchen floor creaked. I heard voices, Crane's, sharp as a blade, and another, low and garbled, like it came from underwater. I couldn't make out words, but the air felt wrong, like it was clotting in my lungs. I found the spot under the kitchen counter, where the slot for food was. There was a box, metal and locked, but I didn't dare touch it. Instead, I saw the vial, left on a shelf, its glass catching the dim light. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cold surface when the floorboards groaned. Crane's boots were inches from my face, separated only by wood. I froze, my heart hammering so loud I was sure he'd hear it. He didn't. He walked away, and I grabbed the vial, tucking it into my sleeve. Chapter 8. The betrayal. I crawled back to the barn, the vial burning against my skin. I didn't tell Ruth I'd gotten it. She'd already given up. Instead, I hid it under my cot, wrapped in a rag. The next day, Crane was different. His eyes were wilder, his bell ringing erratic. He lined us up at dawn, staring at each face like he could smell guilt. "Something's missing," he said, his voice a low growl. I kept my eyes on the dirt, my stomach twisting. That night, Ruth was gone. Her cot was empty, her shoes still there. I thought she'd been taken, like Tommy, until I saw her the next morning, standing by Crane on the porch. She wouldn't look at me. Crane rang his bell, and the work began, but I felt her betrayal like a knife. She'd told him about my plan. I was sure of it. I didn't know why. Fear, maybe, or a promise of freedom. I didn't care. I had the vial, and I'd use it, even if it killed me. Chapter 9. The reckoning, I waited 3 days, until Crane was distracted by the Packard's arrival. The car's rumble shook the ground, and Crane was at the gate, his back to the barn. I slipped into the kitchen through the cellar, the vial in my hand. The food was already prepared, plates lined up for lunch. I uncorked the vial and poured its contents into the kettle of grits, my hand steady for the first time in months. The liquid hissed as it hit the food, sending up a faint steam that smelled of iron. I stirred it in, then ran back to the barn, my heart racing. At lunch, Crane did his ritual, dripping poison onto random plates, not knowing the grits were already tainted. He ate with us that day, a rare thing, sitting at a table on the porch. I watched him take a bite, his jaw working slow. Then he stopped. His eyes widened, and his hand went to his throat. The kids froze, their spoons halfway to their mouths. Crane stood, staggering, his bell falling to the ground with a dull clang. He looked at me, and I swear he smiled, a sick, knowing grin, before he collapsed, his body twitching like a broken toy. Chapter 10. The ghost. The kids didn't cheer. They didn't run. They just stared at Crane's body, then at me, like I'd done something worse than him. I didn't care. I grabbed my pebble and ran for the gate, expecting dogs or traps, but nothing came. The pines swallowed me, their needles sharp against my skin. I ran until my lungs burned, until Blackthorn was a smear behind me. I found a road, then a town, then a man named Amos Reed, an American drifter who took me in. He called me his son, said he'd known me before, though I didn't remember him. He told me Crane wasn't just a man, but something older, something that fed on time itself. He took your years, Amos said, showing me a photo of a man who looked like me, but old, wrinkled, smiling. I didn't believe him, not then. I tried to live, to forget, but Blackthorn followed me. At night, I hear footsteps, slow and heavy, circling my bed. I hear breathing, wet and wrong, like it's waiting for me to sleep. I keep my pebble close, rolling it between my fingers. I don't know if I escaped the hollow, or if it's still in me, carved deep like the words on the gatepost. No soul leaves whole. And now conclusion. I thought running from Blackthorn would be enough. I thought the pines, the road, the miles of dust and gravel would bury the hollow, seal it like a coffin under the weight of the world. I was wrong. The words on the gatepost, no soul leaves whole, weren't a warning. They were a promise, carved not just in wood but in me, in the marrow of my bones. I carry Blackthorn everywhere, a shadow stitched to my heels, a breath that lingers in the quiet of my nights. It's 1957 now, 10 years since I left Elias Crane twitching on the porch, his bell silent, his eyes locked on mine with that sick, knowing grin. 10 years, but time doesn't work right for me anymore. It bends, it breaks, it pools like blood in the hollows of my dreams. I'm 23, or I should be, but mirrors lie. Some days, I see a boy, 13, with dirt under his nails and fear in his eyes. Other days, I see a man, old as stone, his face carved with lines I don't remember earning. Amos Reed, the drifter who took me in, says I was someone else once, someone older, someone who fought Crane before. I don't know if I believe him, but I don't know if I don't, either. All I know is the pebble in my pocket, the one I stole from the fields, still smooth against my fingers, still warm, like it holds a pulse. Amos found me on a road outside Winnipeg, half-starved, my shoes worn to nothing. He was a tall man, American, with a voice like gravel and eyes that saw too much. He said he'd been looking for me, though he wouldn't say why. He gave me his name, his coat, his truck, and called me son. I didn't argue. I had nowhere else to go. We drifted south, crossing the border into North Dakota, then east to Minnesota, never staying long. Amos worked odd jobs, fixing fences, hauling lumber, while I kept quiet, watching the horizon, waiting for Blackthorn to catch up. It always did. At night, I'd hear the footsteps, slow and heavy, crunching on gravel that wasn't there. I'd hear the breathing, wet and ragged, like a beast circling my bed. Amos would find me in the morning, curled on the floor, my pebble clutched so tight it left marks in my palm. He never asked what I saw. He just handed me coffee and said, "Keep moving, Caleb. It's all you can do." We settled in a town called Red Lake, Minnesota, in '49. It was small, a cluster of clapboard houses and a mill that coughed smoke into the sky. Amos got work at the mill, and I swept floors at a diner, my hands still calloused from the fields. The townsfolk were kind enough, but their smiles felt thin, like they knew I didn't belong. I kept to myself, rolling my pebble in my pocket, listening for footsteps. They came less often in Red Lake, but never stopped. I started writing things down, scraps of memory from the hollow, hoping to pin them like moths, to make them stay still. The barn, the bell, the vial of poison, Ruth's betrayal. They spilled onto paper in jagged letters, but they didn't make sense. The more I wrote, the less I remembered, like Blackthorn was stealing my thoughts as fast as I could claim them. Amos read my pages once, his face going pale. "Burn 'em," he said. "Don't let it take root." I didn't listen. I hid the papers under my mattress, thinking they were proof I'd survived. Red Lake was quiet, but quiet doesn't mean safe. In '51, a man came to town, driving a black Packard, its windows dark as oil. I saw it parked outside the diner, its engine idling, a low growl that shook my bones. I dropped a tray of plates, the crash loud enough to turn heads. The cook yelled, but I was already out the back door, my heart hammering. I hid in an alley, clutching my pebble, waiting for the car to leave. It did, but not before I saw the driver. Broad shoulders, a hat tipped low, just like the man who came to the hollow. Amos found me hours later, shivering in the dark. "It's not him," he said, but his voice cracked. "Crane's dead, Caleb. You saw him die." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. Crane wasn't just a man. Amos had told me that much. He was something older, something that fed on time, on lives, on the years we hadn't lived yet. I'd poisoned him, but poison doesn't kill ghosts. Amos started talking more after that, late at night when the mill was quiet and the stars pressed close. He said he'd known Crane before, back in the '20s, when he worked for a group called the Order of the Veil. They hunted things like Crane, things that didn't fit the world's rules. Amos said Crane wasn't his real name, just a mask he wore. His true name was something older, something you couldn't say without tasting ash. The Order had tracked him to a farm in Kansas, then a mill in Ohio. Always the same. Kids, fields, poison, disappearances. They'd caught him once, locked him in a cell lined with iron and salt, but he'd slipped away, leaving 3 men dead, their faces twisted young, their minds broken old. Amos said I'd been part of the Order, too. A man named Daniel Morse, his partner, his mentor. I'd gone to Blackthorn alone, thinking I could stop Crane. I didn't come back. Amos found me years later, a kid with no memory, running from the hollow. "You were 60 when you left," he said, showing me that photo again, the old man who looked like me. "Crane took your years, Caleb. He took you." I didn't want to believe it, but the photo haunted me. The man's eyes were mine, tired and sharp, like they'd seen too much. I started dreaming of him, of Daniel Morse, standing in the cornfields, his hands bleeding, his voice whispering, "You can't run from time." The dreams bled into days, until I couldn't tell what was real. I'd see him in mirrors, in windows, his face flickering over mine. I stopped sleeping, kept my pebble in my hand, rolling it until my fingers ached. Amos noticed, but he didn't push. He just kept working, kept moving, like he could outrun his own ghosts. In '53, the Packard came back. It parked outside our boarding house, its engine humming, its windows black. I didn't run this time. I stood on the porch, my pebble in one hand, a knife in the other. The driver didn't get out. He just sat there, a shadow in the dark, until dawn broke and the car rolled away. Amos didn't sleep that night either. He sat by the window, a shotgun across his lap, muttering prayers I didn't recognize. Red Lake started to sour after that. The mill slowed, the diner lost customers, and the townsfolk stopped smiling. I heard whispers about me, about this strange kid who stared too long, who wrote things nobody should know. In 55, a girl went missing, a mill worker's daughter, 16, with hair like Ruth's. They found her shoes by the river, laces tied neat. The townsfolk looked at me, their eyes hard, like I'd brought Blackthorn with me. Amos said it wasn't my fault, but I saw doubt in his face. I started hearing the footsteps again, louder, closer, crunching through the snow outside our house. The breathing came too, wet and wrong, like it was inside my skull. I checked my papers, my scraps of Blackthorn, and found new words, written in a hand that wasn't mine. You belong to the hollow. I burned them, like Amos had said, but the ashes stuck to my fingers, black as tea. In 56, Amos got sick. His cough was deep, wet, like the breathing I heard at night. The doctor said it was the mill dust, but I knew better. Crane was in him, in us, in the air we breathed. I nursed Amos as best I could, boiling water, fetching medicine, but he faded fast. His eyes grew cloudy, his hands shook, and he started talking to people who weren't there. Daniel, he'd say, looking at me, why'd you go alone? I didn't answer. I couldn't. On his last night, he grabbed my wrist, his grip strong despite the fever. He's not dead, Caleb, he whispered. He's waiting. The hollow's not a place. It's him. He died before dawn, his eyes open, staring at something I couldn't see. I buried him behind the house, under a pine, and left Red Lake the next day. I took his truck, his coat, and the photo of Daniel Morse. The pebble stayed in my pocket, heavier now, like it carried Amos too. I drifted again, through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, never staying long. I worked where I could, docks, farms, factories, but Blackthorn followed. The footsteps, the breathing, the dreams of Daniel Morse, they were my shadow, my skin. In 57, I ended up in a town called Ironwood, Michigan, a mining town carved into the hills. I got work in a smelter, hauling slag, the heat burning my lungs. The men there were hard, their faces like Amos's, cracked and tired. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't give answers. I rented a room above a bar, its walls thin, its floor creaking. I thought I'd be safe, thought I'd outrun it. I was wrong. The Packard came on my third night, parked across the street, its engine idling. I watched from my window, my pebble in one hand, Amos's knife in the other. The driver didn't move, but I felt his eyes, like needles in my skull. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. When the car left at dawn, I knew it wasn't over. Ironwood was where I started to unravel. The dreams grew worse. Not just Daniel Morse, but the hollow itself, the barn, the fields, the bell. I'd wake with dirt in my mouth, my hands bleeding like they'd been hoeing corn. I saw Ruth in crowds, her straw hair, her trader's eyes, but when I chased her, she was gone. I heard Crane's bell and the smelter's clang, his breathing in the steam. I stopped eating, stopped talking, just worked and watched and waited. The men at the smelter started avoiding me, whispering about the ghost kid who smelled of ash. In December, a miner went missing, his boots found in a shaft, laces tied neat. They blamed me, like Red Lake had, and I didn't argue. I knew the truth. Crane was here, or I was still there, trapped in the hollow, running in circles. That I left Ironwood in 58, but I didn't run far. I couldn't. The pebble was too heavy, the dreams too loud. I ended up in a cabin outside town, a shack with no heat, no light, just walls to keep the wind out. I lived on canned beans, stolen from a store, and water from a creek that tasted of rust. I wrote again, not to remember, but to end it. I filled pages with Blackthorn, with Crane, with Amos, with Daniel Morse, hoping to bleed the hollow out of me. The pages piled up, their edges curling, their ink smearing. I saw new words again, not mine. Come home, Caleb. I didn't burn them this time. I read them over and over until my eyes burned. The footsteps were constant now, circling the cabin, crunching through snow. The breathing was louder, wetter, like it came from my chest. I saw a Crane in the creek's reflection, his oil-slick eyes, his grin. I saw Daniel Morse in my shadow, old and broken, whispering, "You can't run from time." One night, I couldn't take it. I took Amos's knife, the pebble, and the photo, and drove his truck north, back to Canada, back to Manitoba. I didn't know why, but my hands knew the road, my blood knew the way. Blackthorn was waiting, its pines blacker, its air thicker. The town was gone, just ash and rubble, but the hollow stood, its windows dark, its gateposts still carved. No soul leaves whole. I walked the fields, the corn gone, the trapdoor rusted shut. I stood on the porch, where Crane had died, and heard his bell, faint, like it was under the boards. I went to the barn, its cots rotted, its walls sagging. The footsteps followed, the breathing too, but they weren't outside anymore. They were in me, my pulse, my lungs. I sat on my old cot, the one with the red smear, and took out the photo. Daniel Morse stared back, his eyes mine, his pain mine. I understood then. Crane hadn't taken my years. He'd taken me, all of me, and left a ghost to wander. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, days, years. Time doesn't work right in the hollow. I heard the Packard's growl, saw its lights through the barn's cracks. The driver got out this time, his boots crunching, his shadow long. I didn't run. I didn't fight. I rolled the pebble in my hand, its pulse fading, and waited. The door creaked open, and I saw his face, not Crane's, but mine, older, broken, like Daniel Morse. He smiled, sick and knowing, and held out his hand. I took it, and the world went black. I woke in the barn, 13 again, the bell ringing, the fields waiting. The gatepost was there, its words fresh. No soul leaves whole. I don't run anymore. I work, I eat, I listen for footsteps. Blackthorn isn't a place. It's me. It's all of us, ghosts in the hollow, circling forever, no soul leaving whole.